And I think it's live. Cool. All right, we're 6 seconds in. I was just staring at it. But welcome to the Homelab show. This is episode 1. We're going to start with virtualization. I'm Tom Lawrence, and this is
Jay LaCroix,
also known as the Linux guy and Learn Linux TV. So we're pretty easy. We're pretty easy to find, and we're starting this podcast because we want to get people more and more in virtualization. Reach back to episode 0, which kind of defines what we're doing. Now, me and Jay debated a little bit. We had chicken and egg debate of, do we start with virtualization? Do we start with networking?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think when I thought more about it, almost everyone has a router, and we can't go over every router model out there, but people want to run things on their home lab. They don't always want to redesign their entire network already at the beginning. So sometimes it's just a matter of using what you have. It's a good starting point for that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a lot about Proxmox and XCP-ng, but don't limit yourself to only those, just because those are the popular ones that Tom and Jay talk about. I've actually done a few videos about VirtualBox, which I actually, oddly, I use VirtualBox a lot because that's how I run Windows on my Linux machine. People always ask, well, how do you manage when you have to do something in Windows because you use Linux full time? And VirtualBox. I just pop it open up the Windows thing that I need directly on my computer and get it done, test something, run piece of software for somebody. Occasionally we have to connect to clients that Windows is required, unfortunately. That's just life. But
yeah. There's a lot of solutions out there for sure.
Do you use VirtualBox at all, Jay?
I do. It's funny. I did a almost 2-hour long video on installing Arch Linux, and it would not have been as easy. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't going to be as easy without VirtualBox, because I could start the install, I could take routine snapshots, I could undo a step in the process and redo it infinitely. And that allowed me to really make the flow of the Arch Linux install work in a video, because I could literally rehearse every part over and over again, encrypted, not encrypted, installing the one kernel, installing a different kernel. It was just immensely useful for that.
Yeah, it's still really handy occasionally when I was doing some testing with Security Onion. It's just convenient. They already have a VirtualBox image. I happen to have a really nice Ryzen computer here, as do you. You have something fast and you're like, I got lots of memory, I got lots of speed. Let me just test this real quick. And it's convenient. It's right here. I have access to the terminal without any type of, not that you can't with Proxmox or XCP-ng, but there's a level of convenience. I also have it on my laptop, so if I want to run something locally there, and small Linux VMs run pretty good. So one of the important things to start out with virtualization is, why do you do it? And the goal is, and virtualization is still one of those magical things to me. I mean, I think VMware was probably the first one out there, but once you start taking and thinking about the efficiency you add to, let's run everything in one machine and virtualize the hardware, my mind was blown. Like, this is the future. Like, I was super stoked about it. And here we are. And now we can just take running virtual machines and pass them over to other hypervisors, other physical computers, and without restarting them. So definitely great. And these are features that, most of these features, I think we do a video for Proxmox, or maybe I just did one, Proxmox versus XCP-ng.
Oh, we've been wanting to do that. I don't remember that we've done it together. I don't know if you've done it yourself, but I think we've been wanting to do a video on Proxmox versus XCP-ng, and we've been asked to do it by many people, and we've been wanting to do it. It's just we're always so busy, we haven't gotten around to it. I think that might be some of the basis for the idea today to go over hypervisors in this first episode.
Yeah, and one of the things too is I know I did at least one video comparing it, but that video is now somewhat irrelevant because Proxmox has added features that didn't exist when I did that video. My understanding is the new version of Proxmox has a better backup system in it now too, right?
Yes, it does. It has a special backup service that you can actually install on a separate machine. I think you probably could install it on the same, but I don't know why you'd want to do that. But they do offer a separate product that is supposed to tie into it. I've been wanting to look into that for a while. I have not, so I can't give an opinion about that today, but it is on my list of things to check out. And I'm happy that they made that available, because I think that's it has a built-in backup system, but if you have another appliance or server, maybe you might want to make that into a backup server for it.
And this is one of those things that I thought I really liked about XCP-ng is it's kind of a complete package, so to speak. depending on your perspective. XCP-ng is the hypervisor. Zen Orchestra is the orchestration tool that manages it, which some people don't like that they're two separate things, but
Right.
the Zen Orchestra has a full suite of backup methods. So from disaster recovery planning to incremental snapshots to a lot of automation around how you handle your VMs, including things like load balancing, is all handled within there. So
Yeah. And one thing I'll say, just as a kind of aside, I try to not do versus videos with a winner at the end. I don't really believe in that unless something is orders of magnitude better and it just naturally works out that one works out better. But I like to point out the pros and the cons. Even though I use Proxmox, I'll be more than happy to talk about the things that I don't like about it as well. And with XCP-ng, same thing. I mean, to be fair, I could right now do a video XCP-ng versus Proxmox with a really ridiculous thumbnail of me with a stupid pose, and announce a winner at the end, and I could probably get hundreds of thousands of views in the video. But I don't want to do that because I feel like there's pros and cons, and I don't want to go to that level and think to that, which I don't want to sell out. But I think there's some pros and cons that really do need to be discussed about those solutions. And that's kind of what my angle is today, is just to talk about the things I like and don't like about both, because I am actually testing XCP-ng right now as we speak. So
yeah, there's occasionally the mentality of a lot of people, they want a clear winner. And there's also the concept in
right.
tech that comes up quite if when there's two competing products and you make a choice of one, you didn't make that choice arbitrarily. Also, you must hate the other product. Like there must be some incredibly strong reason you've went with this product and you must therefore hate said product. But yeah, there's definitely a bit much of that. So where should we start with the hypervisors? Do we
I
go
have
with
an idea.
Proxmox or XCP-ng? Because you're running
Actually,
through this decision right now.
well, okay. So what I think we should do, just real quick and not make it a too long of a portion of this, but I think we should go back a step, because the question is, what do you run it on? And real quick, you could run it on anything when it comes to a hypervisor. I did a video on using laptops as a hypervisor, because you have to have something to install it on. Otherwise, you
Yes.
can't use it. So the point of the laptop, to keep that short, is what a lot of people don't realize is you have a built-in UPS. You have a battery, assuming that it works, assuming that the battery still has life in it. You have a built-in KVM. You have a keyboard and a display. So in one chassis, you have the KVM, the UPS, and the server all together. And sometimes people have laptops lying around because they don't have a lot of resale value. Maybe you'll get $100 off of it off of eBay. Why not turn it into a hypervisor? And I can't take credit for this idea. Someone else on a podcast I listened to came up, mentioned this, that laptops are a good fit. And that's where I got the idea from. I wish I remembered the individual's name to credit them. But then also there's Intel NUCs. I've heard of people running virtualizers on that. You could buy off-lease servers off of eBay. There's plenty of those. If you have a spare desktop lying around, as long as it has virtualization support, that's the only requirement. And as far as specs, there's no hard requirements. It's just that the more CPU cores and the more memory you have, the more things you can run. So it just presents a ceiling to you. You don't have a minimum number of cores. If you have one core, maybe you'll run one or two VMs on that. But if you have 8 cores, even better. So I think the first thing I tell everyone about Homelab, about hypervisors, networking, use what you have to start out. Don't just think that this is, oh, I have to go buy a bunch of stuff. No, you probably have stuff lying around that you can use. You have a router, even if it's a D-Link router, or not that there's anything wrong with that. You could probably set up forwarding rules in there. There's options you can use to set up your network. So use what you have first. That's where I would say is the best place to start. And then you have to choose, what do you want to run on your hardware? And now that's where XCP-ng and Proxmox comes into play.
Yeah, and I do like the mental concept, because I built a cluster called the Lackluster Dell cluster when I was doing a clustering video, and I just took a bunch of old Dell computers, I think 3 or 4 of them, and tied them together to build a cluster with XCP-ng. You don't necessarily need server hardware. This stuff is, like you said, fairly flexible, and the laptop idea is actually kind of a cool one. You have a handful of laptops stacked up. For a home lab environment and trying to learn that setup is kind of a fun way to build it.
Exactly. I mean, using what you have and having that mentality just really sets the stage for the rest, because just if you do have extra money and you want to buy something, yeah, if that's what you want to do, but you could also save that money and put it and invest it and not buy anything if you have things lying around. You don't need state of the art stuff. And if you think about it, you're just one person typically, or you're one family when you're home labbing. So it's not like you have 1,000 users. So that server that is on eBay for $100 that is not useful to a big company anymore because it just doesn't fit the bill anymore. For you and your family or your local circle, it's more than fine and probably more powerful than you might think it would be.
Yeah, the amount of deals there are on eBay are pretty impressive right now, and a lot of it's being driven just with these data centers. There's a faster churn, the demand, that space is very available in a data center, and there's more and more churn happening with some relatively fast hardware you can acquire for reasonable prices.
Yep. I do want to mention, I know we were going to get to the comments later. That's how we're structuring the show, is we
Yeah,
start with the topic and then we go into the comments. But there was one that kind of just stood out, that Proxmox and XCP-ng are not hypervisors, which is true. It's
yeah.
Zen and KVM. But it's kind of one of those things that's really hard to avoid because you kind of lump things in the same category as human nature. So we're also human, by the way, just so you guys know that if you didn't know already. But yeah, that is true. We kind of use hypervisor, at least speaking for myself, even sometimes where it doesn't make sense. But essentially, you're building a virtualization server.
Yeah. And I know it's all depends on how you want to break it down. I mean, if you call it the
Yeah.
computer, but then, you know, I'm not going to get pedantic. I get
Yep.
it. And a lot of people are in tech. And I do believe
Yeah.
absolutely in importance of not just generically calling everything a monitor like many end users do. Everything's just a monitor to some end users, no matter what part it is.
Exactly.
But I agree. There's it's trying to find a balance on there. We do realize the underlying technology is technically the hypervisor, and Zen server is what's in the base of XCP-ng. And what's the back end for Proxmox?
That would be KVM,
Yeah, it's using KVM
the
internally.
kernel
So
modules. Yep. The built-in virtualization support in the Linux kernle. So I'll just mention some of my thoughts about both XCP-ng and Proxmox and why I made the decision. I'll try to keep this in a short summary if I can. But when I was looking at those to figure out which one I wanted to go with, I have to say it was a hard choice. It was not like, oh, this one is so much better than the other. I have had a history with Zen Server for quite a while. So it was probably pushing that ahead for me because I have fond memories of working with it when I did professionally. But what I liked about Proxmox was two things, two benefits, which one, I only have one benefit now. I'll mention why in a minute. But at first, it was the built-in user interface. It wasn't a separate component. At the time, I didn't like that. A lot of people don't like that. But what really pushed it over the edge is that I can make a decision because it has built-in container support. We're not going to talk about containers today, but I like the fact that I can make an intelligent decision about when I want to host an app, is it going to be in a virtual machine or a container? Maybe it's fine in a container. And again, I don't want to make this a discussion about containerization, but I do think it's important to point out that containerize all the things is not a great idea. Some apps do not work well in containers. It's trial and error. It's just the way it is. Some apps were just hard coded with certain things. They just don't run as well. But I can make that decision with Proxmox because it's built in. And that doesn't mean you can't run containers on XCP-ng. It just means it's built in with Proxmox. And I think that was what really pushed me over the edge going that direction. However, I will retract feeling like the lack of a UI built in is a detriment, because when I just installed XCP-ng, last week, I really liked the fact that the UI component was separate because I can install Zen Orchestra, which is what that's called, on my laptop. I don't have to use CPU cycles on my virtualization server for the UI. If I wanted to, I could run it on a desktop, but I installed it on my laptop. And I like that because it's separate. And you could argue maybe there's a security benefit there or there's not. But I like the portability of the user interface now that I look more into it. But one of the things that I would say, pros and cons, I'll just say one thing I think is a benefit of both. I would feel like when it comes to XCP-ng, it's better for mass deployments. If you have a company or you are a company and you have offices all over the place, I feel like XCP-ng would be better for mass deployments and going, commercially over the globe, so to speak, than Proxmox would be. Doesn't mean you can't do it in Proxmox, but I think that's a major benefit with that. I also like that there seems to be more development around XCP-ng, partially because it's newer. They just have more exciting features, in my opinion. Some of the release notes for Proxmox can be a little underwhelming, in my opinion, but Proxmox is very, very easy to get started. I would say a little easier than XCP-ng, and everything is all built into one. There's one component, so you could argue that that's a benefit. There's pros and cons to both, but those are some of my opinions on it.
One of the differences with XCP-ng and me talking to the team over at Oliver Lambert and the team, Vates, that actually produces the open source project. One of the reasons that they have so many features being added quickly is they have a lot of data centers using it. And I don't mean like people in data centers. I mean like large scale companies. If you look at some of the large companies that partner with them to deploy it, they have some people who are using it at scale. And it's not like it's a new hypervisor. This came from Zen Server, which is a really long time, been around for quite a while, hypervisor, and Citrix had built it out. And Citrix, being the marketing company that they are in some ways, and a big tech company, they marketed very well to get a lot of people on it. And they kind of didn't innovate anymore. The only innovation they had was crank that license fee up higher, keep removing features and charge more. And we're not going to add any value. So because there was such a large commercial base already of large scale users, when they flipped over to XCP-ng and kind of forked back the project away from Citrix and started producing, all the full features, it brought all these data center problems that people were wanting. So they already had a backlog of requests that Citrix has been kind of going, yeah, we'll get around to it. How about we just charge you more for licensing? So now that you have a team really interested in developing the product and has a methodology around it and they got quite a few people working over there at Vates. They're not small anymore. They've scaled up quickly in the last couple of years and are still hiring more people. That innovation now is being driven by all the funding that comes in from them selling support contracts for it. So it's not like they don't have a model around it, but that's causing this kind of ramp up of popularity and innovation, which is really, really cool to see. Like you said, it scales out very big by keeping the components separate, but you're right. If you're a new user starting out and you're only going to ever run this on maybe one server you have, it can make a little bit less sense to you to run XCP-ng, and maybe Proxmox would be a better fit for you. And I don't have a problem with Proxmox at all. I've played around with it a little bit. I'm not an expert on it. That's why I just defer people to Jay's channel for videos and tutorials on it. I don't plan on doing any, but I think it, like you said, it's a lot easier for the first time users to get started. And someone mentioned, and it's worth noting, it uses QEMU and KVM underneath, and so does Synology. So kind of a little bit on the hardware topic, I know at least some of the Homelab people do like Synology, and Synology has their own spin they put on the interface. They have their own UI for it. And I actually just did a quick review of it because it's free for the basic features, but as soon as you want any advanced features, they have a license fee associated with it. But yes, Synology does have that as well. I just addressed that in the comments.
Yep. Yeah. So I think we could talk all day about pros and cons, but I think that really, in my opinion, kind of narrows it down. I'm not going to make this in a, Jay's Proxmox versus Tom's XCP-ng battle of the best kind of thing, which I know a lot of people want, but we have to be honest. I mean, if there was one that was so much better than the other, then there wouldn't be the other, because everyone would just use the one that is clearly better. And the fact that we have this competition means that there's value. And sometimes it even comes down to some IT administrators just want to run at home what they run at work, because they want to just, use it as one, they could get their Homelab done, but also they're at the same time learning more about the solution that their employer uses. And sometimes that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people always mentioning, Hyper-V and ESXi, and they do have, like in ESXi, I know they have like special home edition licenses, or I'm not exactly sure how that works. I know there's been changes to that program, But either way, there are ways you can get this set up in your home lab. Now, if you're working towards a job to be an administrator that does ESXi because that's what you use at work, that's a really valid reason not to try either one of these and go with
Right.
what you're going to be using. Because one of the purposes of the home lab is, one, to learn. Now, is your goal to learn a hypervisor? Well, then you might want to learn a hypervisor that is at the end of that job goal that you have. So if your job goal is to become a hypervisor administrator at a place that you know employs people who use ESXi, that's probably the best one to learn on. I think it's even more fun if you can learn on all of these, because I've tested each one of these and learning the nuances of one or the other. It's helped. And there's a few people that are going to mention, things like Hyper-V. If you're going to use Hyper-V and your goal or the work organization that you have, the next level up at your job is a Hyper-V admin because that's what their backend is based on, then go with that. That's going to be a good choice for you because it's going to give you the learning experience you want to get where you want to be, where you want to level up to. I'm not trying to level up to be a Hyper-V admin, so that's not me.
And we are forced to be a little impartial at the same time, given the audience. But at the same time, let's be honest, there's a lot of people out there that are starting Home Lab only because they want to run Plex, because that's
Yep.
a very popular entry point. And sometimes that leads people in a rabbit hole. Maybe that's all they ever wanted to do. They want to run a Plex server. They want to watch movies. That's it. But then when they set up that server, like, wait a minute, this is fun. I just set up a server running Linux and it runs Plex. And I've been watching my movies on there and it's great. But what else can I do with this server? What else can I host? And then you go down that rabbit hole. And sometimes that's how people get led into this. I think everyone's reason for starting a home lab is different, but I think though that's a very popular one to learn, which is how I started. Actually, that's one of the reasons I started. I think I got really annoyed with some of the providers I was using not being fast enough when I submitted tickets. Like, part of that is my arrogance. Like, fine, I'm just going to do it myself. Like, I don't want to wait. So,
And someone brought up another one that we didn't mention at all, Unraid. Unraid has been popular for a while. One of the things, and I'm not an Unraid user, but I've watched a few videos on it to get an idea. There's actually one particular YouTube channel, if you look them up, it's got a weird name. I think it says Space Invader 1, if I'm not mistaken. He's got a bunch of Unraid videos. I know they exist. I remember watching a few of them because I was curious. Not curious enough to actually load Unraid. But one of the things I noticed about Unraid is they seem to do a nice job of offering a web UI that lets you pass through devices. This is something that is a popular for home lab, less used, and with some exception, but less used in the business market because the idea is to make a VM completely portable. You can put it in any machine. And the problem with passing through hardware, it ties that VM to that machine. But for home users, you're trying to get the best bang for the buck. And Unraid, I believe, makes that a little bit easier. I think they just have like a checkbox that says, hey, take this device and allow it to be used inside this VM, like pass it through. You can do that both with Proxmox and XCP-ng, but I don't know about the Proxmox process, but I will say the XCP-ng, they have a write-up in the tutorial how to do it. It is a more complex process because it does require command line, figuring out the PCI device name, and setting it up.
Yep. Haven't used that myself, the Unraid service, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. It's helped a lot of people use what they have, going back to the start, and it enables people to do that rather than having to have very specific hardware. They can abstract that a little bit and use whatever they might have in their box of junk parts or whatever. But you could stretch that pretty far, which I think is a lot of fun too.
No, I've never used it, but I've seen it come up a couple times here in the comments as the overt. Not something I've used, so I can't really speak to it. Is there any good interface on top of overt?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'd have to look at it off camera.
Yeah, it's not one. So me and Jay are not going to be your help much of a guide on overt. Neither one of us has used it, and I never really dug into the interface on it. Someone did bring up a good point, though. Now, I will mention TrueNAS in two different ways. So current TrueNAS, and I know someone is going to be offended because they already said how much they love the way Beehive works in TrueNAS. I don't share that love with you. I have found TrueNAS and Beehive to be more buggy and less stable. Not to throw shade, I'm a huge TrueNAS fan, but the TrueNAS system, when it came to the hypervisors, I really feel like it's just not as well developed with the Beehive system. that leads us over to TrueNAS Scale, which is going to have KVM integrated. That obviously is a pretty exciting product release that they're working on. I've done some updated videos on that topic, but TrueNAS Scale, when it comes out, because it's going to be Debian based, will, I believe, have all KVM in there, but all the wonderful goodness that is TrueNAS and ZFS and the way it works, which is a very well developed product. Yeah, that's obviously going to be exciting. It's still very beta right now, so it's not something I'm really going to. It's not something I'm going to be doing anytime soon. I'm going to wait till, well, right now it's in alpha. I can't even say beta. So TrueNAS Scale is alpha right now. So that's why I haven't done any videos on it. I did a video to talk about its production and where it's at, but it's not something I would run things on. It's in like, hey, watch all these bugs and I'll do some bug reporting with this phase.
Yep. And someone asked what the robot thing is on top of my server rack. And that's a Mycroft device. It's the Mycroft Mark I, and I haven't had time to get back to him yet. I at one point had him configured to do all kinds of different things, ended up misconfiguring it and broke it, but I plan on getting back into that and setting him up. I'm going to set him up to be like, I could say, hey, and then name of assistant, which I don't want to say right now because it'll interrupt us. And I could say, update all my servers, and maybe it'll run an Ansible script to, do some various things. I had it hooked up to my jukebox that's running Volumio, if I'm saying that right. And I actually did have it set up to where I could tell it the name of a song and artist, and it would just play it. I had like really loud dedicated speakers on that, which was a lot of fun. I just haven't had time to get him re-enabled yet. So maybe in the future I'll do a video on it. Right now it's kind of on a soft pause though. He looks cool up here though.
I actually think that'll be a fun Homelab video, because that'll be the how to build your home automation thing you can talk to that doesn't belong to one of the big companies.
Yeah, I think that's why I got it too, because I mean, the code is exposed and I love Python. And at some point I want to write my own, plugins for it, which is what I intend on doing. And they give you the framework for that too. They give you like a skeleton Python thing that you can just start with. And then you could just, what types of things and interfaces you have to build. And then you just build it, which is pretty cool that they give that to you. And you could actually, I haven't done this, but you can actually download the source code and run it on a Linux machine. You don't actually have to buy the device. I wanted to support them though, which is why I did it. So
yeah, it's definitely pretty cool. We'll definitely do we'll do an episode just on that, talking about all its features. Now,
and someone mentioned Lacuna Coil, so I got someone else loves Lacuna Coil too. Yay, my favorite band. Anyway.
Other people are talking here about when we was bringing all the way back to virtualization. One thing that's of note, because someone asked about Ceph support, there's a lot of add-on support that I haven't really dove into and tested, but you can head over to the forums. And this goes for both Proxmox and XCP-ng. They both have support for more than just ZFS or ext-based file systems. But one thing that TrueNAS, XCP-ng didn't do that Proxmox did do was the way snapshots are handled in XCP-ng. They are snapshots as part of the hypervisor setup and wrapper, as someone would prefer me to call it. It's part of their snapshots. When you use Proxmox, if I'm not mistaken, Jay, doesn't it actually natively talk to the ZFS file system to do the snapshots?
It does. I haven't done as much testing on that. I was using ZFS. I had some major problems with that in Proxmox where I felt like ZFS support was not mature enough. Now that was quite a while ago though, so I have no doubt that they fixed it by now. I actually plan on converting it back over to ZFS so I can submit bug reports if I run into the same problems again. But yeah, I'm going to have to say I don't know. I've heard that, but that's something I'll need to test off camera.
Yeah. Now, as far as the other, more SAN-oriented distributed large-scale file systems such as GlusterFS or Ceph, those, I think more Homelab people ask about them than would actually use them. They're cool. I'm going to be working, and this is some future hints to what's going on in my channel. 45 Drives and me are going to be getting together. 45 Drives has a lot of good videos explaining large-scale file systems. And they're going to join me on my channel where we're going to talk about some of the larger scale file systems. And it's kind of an interesting topic. I don't want to get us off topic on there. Most of the time, though, as a Homelab user, you're fine to set this up with, a RAID EXT system or a ZFS system, and that's probably adequate for the majority of Homelab users. But once you, need a super high-level storage server, or you want to cluster your storage across multiple storage servers, then things like your Gluster or Ceph start making sense. Going, all right, I have these 3 systems. This is actually something that TrueNAS Scale is going to be designed to really facilitate as well, is you're going to be able to scale out, hence the name, and then say, all right, here's my file system living across 3 servers. That's great, but a lot of Homelab people are going, no, I want to try to condense everything to 1 server. And you'll get there eventually, but we don't want to get too far out of scope on this.
Right. Yeah, that's a rabbit hole, that conversation.
Everything's all connected, man. It's all physically wired to itself. So it's sometimes that's the hardest part we have, is when me and Jay are putting these topics together, going, how do we narrow it down?
Yeah, and I have a hard time narrowing things and summarizing things already as it is. So, which people watching my videos probably are well aware of. So looking at the comments, I think we should knock out some questions.
Sure.
So, you see anything?
Why does 45 drives not use Epic? Someone just popped up. And I'll actually, if you go, some of their models are slowly starting to support it. I think what people don't realize is the way supply pipelines work when you're trying to build out servers. They don't turn on a dime. Servers have to be turned on and should hopefully, within a 5 to 7 year life cycle of a server, never fail or get turned off. So just because something new and shiny is out there, you'll find a slower adoption, especially in hardware, before you see very high levels of availability to something. So I did notice, though, I believe a couple of their options now when you're pricing out servers on 45 drives, we were just doing it the other day for a client, now offer Epic. So it's not like their default option, but it is an option on there.
Yep. And someone brought up power usage, which is the elephant in the room when it comes to Homelab. At one point, I think my rack was using 500 to 600 watts all the time. And some of the ways that I got around that was I used a Raspberry Pi with Wake on LAN. And inside the servers, I had them automatically shut down at, I think, midnight, because I'm sleeping. I don't need the servers to run while I'm sleeping unless it's the day they send offsite backups. So I would have the cron job on the servers to shut them off. And then the Raspberry Pi had a cron job at like 7:30 in the morning, and it would trigger Wake on LAN for all the servers. So as I'm waking up, I'd actually hear the whir of the Dell servers powering up right as I'm waking up. And I saved some money just by not having the servers on when I'm not awake and no one else in the house is awake, so that no one cares at 3 in the morning that the Plex server isn't available. So that worked out pretty well for me. And then also, this is a topic for another day, Raspberry Pis for some use cases are very, very good for a lot of things. They use a lot less power. And then finally, the rack behind me, I did some videos on this. Each of the 2 servers between TrueNAS and Proxmox are using about 50 watts each. So I went from everything combined, I think it's like 140, 150 watts down from 600. And I did that by using more power efficient components. So there are some ways to game that quite a bit if you get into that. If nothing else, if you have a super power hungry server already and you don't want to buy another one, you can't buy another one, then just have it turn off when you're not using it. Get a Raspberry Pi to turn it back on for you. Just enable Wake on LAN in the BIOS, install the Wake on LAN package, and then you could save some money on that alone.
Yeah, trying to be efficient is kind of a mix. As much as you can find some good deals on enterprise hardware, one of the other expenses that data centers have is wattage and electricity. So when they get some of the new ones and you grab some of those old ones, you realize, oh, these were not as efficient. That's part of the reason for the life cycle change, was to have something that is an even higher efficiency. Right. So there is some advantage to buying and building some of your own. Occasionally, you'll find that you might be able to save a few watts on some of the home built stuff versus the enterprise stuff. I've noticed that, it's just the nature of it. Like the Dell R series servers are really popular, and each version is a little bit more efficient than the previous one, but they have a lot of fans, they have a lot of wattage that they pull, and between the noise factor, as someone brought up earlier, and the wattage, there are other more efficient ways to go. Matter of fact, we have our oldest and happiest old TrueNAS is an old i5, like a generic motherboard, like with the crappy Intel mount and a fan, not liquid cooled. The thing's been running for 6 years now continuously. It even has a standard Corsair power supply. It's in a large, form factor chassis. It's in a rack mount chassis, but it works perfectly fine running TrueNAS with it has a SAS expander card to handle how many drives it has in it, and that's it. There's nothing special about the board. It's a consumer board. Is plain and simple. It's not even a gaming board. It's not anything slightly better.
And I'm glad you brought up the R series servers. One of the things a couple of things I did, and I know this sounds obvious to a lot of you out there, but check the BIOS settings, because it could be on, I forgot what the setting is called, where it's using all the power on the CPUs all the time. And at a business, you kind of need that because you want those VMs to like fire up quickly, and you don't really need that at home. Just turn that down. You don't need to run everything at the maximum. But another thing I did is that I bought there's L series Xeon CPUs you could buy on eBay. You could replace the CPUs in your Dell servers with those L series CPUs. They use orders of magnitude less power. And for $11 on eBay, I ordered some of those processors. They sent me a Ziploc bag full of like 10 of them for $11. Literally 11 US dollars. I had more of these CPUs than I could ever use. I only had like 4 servers, and each had 2 CPU slots each. So one of them, I actually unpopulated one of the CPU slots and lowered the amount of RAM, and then replaced the one remaining CPU with an L series one. And then the hypervisors, I filled both sockets in there, and I just switched everything to L series CPUs, and that saves some power. So that $11 will pay for itself probably the same month you buy it, if that's something you already have, as you have your Dell servers. So look at the BIOS settings and look at the L series Xeon CPUs. A lot of people don't think to consider that.
Yeah, and as we talked about in the very beginning of the show, laptops. It's an easy solution. They're generally designed with power efficiency in mind from the time they built the laptop to try and operate on battery. They're still, not going to be the most powerful, but for getting started, for low noise. I mean, even when a fan ramps up on a laptop, it's usually not killer loud. And
Right.
yeah, that's another option if you want to start with some low powered options for building your home lab.
Oh yeah.
But you can find some deals on these old laptops, shove a little extra memory in there, and now you have a nice system to run a bunch of virtual machines on.
And thanks to Jeff for buying my book. It's something I keep forgetting to mention in live streams. My new
Jay's got a
Ubuntu
book.
Yeah, I got a book, ubuntuserverbook.com, easy URL. Just go to that and it points you to Amazon, which I don't know, if you're not in the United States, that might work against you because it might just bring you to the United States page. Either way, it's a good starting point if you're curious. I've heard some good things about the book, so apparently I guess I may have possibly done a good job with it. So either way, it's a thing that exists if you want a book, want something to read. So thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, the getting rid of heat, a few people brought that up. That's just kind of a pain in the butt.
Oh yeah.
You can put in split systems. At some point, these computers, even my office is actually a 6x9 closet. And I kind of joke because I don't really need to heat it much in the winter because I can just render a couple of videos. And once all them cores get peaked up, even my single computer that's in this office, which is, a nice Ryzen system, it starts really kicking out some heat.
Yep.
There's no easy answer for that one. You can look into those split systems. If you're not familiar with what a split system is, they're often an HVAC system that can be added additionally that kind of has a split. And if you put this in the closet, we do this commercially a lot, but there's consumer ones that are somewhat affordable to do to be able to add to your area that you keep all of this in. Basements are kind of a cool way to do this. If you're lucky enough to have a good space that you don't have to worry about moisture or flooding issues, and get it in the basement so it's separated. Craft Computing, I'll mention him. I've done some collab videos with him before. He's actually done a lot of good videos on servers lately. He's been buying some off eBay. He also bought, I believe, in one of his videos, he talks about a fan shelf, and that's when you have a rack, you can put one shelf that's dedicated to fans, and it helps circulate air out of the rack. So there's other ways to get it away from the rack, It still just ends up somewhere else. You have to have somewhere else for it to go, though.
Someone asked about PDF format for the book. If you buy it from the publisher, they have it in PDF and EPUB. But more on topic about heat, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a constant problem I don't talk about. If it ever looks like I'm sweating in my videos, I am. This room, if you think about it, there's 2 desktops, there's a server rack, and to not be undone, I have a reptile terrarium that has a box turtle that lives in there that has heat lamps. So after about 3 hours, I'm faced with a decision. Do I open the door and let all, to basically cool it off? That's all I have to do is open the door, which means the kids will run in here. And, it's fine. But it's just one of those things that's always been difficult for me. And I won't even notice that I was sweating until the video is already uploaded. I'm like, oh, how did I not notice that? That's embarrassing. But this room generates a lot of heat. Within 2 to 3 hours, it's like it's insufferable in this room. So I need to probably work on that at some point. I thought about putting in an AC, but as soon as I do that, I record videos in here. So you don't want to hear a loud AC in the background, and I don't. So it's kind of complicated. So yeah, that's definitely an issue.
Definitely an issue. And the reason I brought up moisture is because I'm aware, as someone pointed out, that yes, craft computing suffered a flood over at his place where he lives on that side of the world. It's funny because me and him are personal friends, and we've had some conversations that are not on YouTube when we were just talking. And we were at the time where I lived, we talked about flooding issues, and he was telling me how he had 2 sump pumps and a backup. And right. It took a calamity of errors because every backup failed and turned into him flooding his studio, which turned out to be not the total. It was not good, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. He got it mitigated. So he's got a video on that for those wondering about craft computing. And JSB, just thank you for the £5, as it says pounds, £5 donation. I believe that's pounds. I know American dollars, but we'll.
It's fine.
We'll do I don't know what the converts to, so I'll just say £5.
Yeah, that works for me. Yeah, for sure. See if there's anything else in here that, well, as an aside, excuse me, I had a water issue of my own, but that was back in like 2012. And it was the weirdest thing. I had everything elevated. So you couldn't really, I mean, if the basement flooded where my Homelab stuff was, it wasn't going to flood my rack. But what I didn't realize is that I had like an ice shelf building in one of the bedrooms. Between the door, there's actually a door in the bedroom leading out to the patio. There's a screen door, and in between, a wall of ice developed. And then when spring came, that wall of ice started to melt, and it melted and dripped through the floor. And thankfully, it was only the cable modem that decided to be where all the water drained into the cable modem, because it was had a vent on the top, so the water came down. Cable modem completely destroyed. Thankfully, that's all that happened. But you don't think about a random ice shelf just building between doors and draining into your basement. But water and technology doesn't really mix unless it's water cooled. But then again, as long as there's a rupture, that should be fine.
Yeah, and something else when you're thinking about where to put the servers and placement, and I've been dragging my feet because I haven't finished it. I put a rack in at my house in my basement, and I still don't have. It's a new house build, and the sump pump's new, but I still am going to put a backup sump pump in there. That solves one water mitigation problem. The second water mitigation problem is, and if I could find the video, I would link to it, but I don't know where it is. Wendell did a really good video, Wendell from Level 1 Techs, on building out data centers. And one of the things you have to think about, or just building out a server closet, is putting plastic up above if there's the potential for water to come from above. Where my rack has to be and where it's most practically laid out happens to be under where both showers are, right above it. So if there's anywhere where there's going to be a leak in my house because of some incident of an overflowing shower or something like that, or bathtub, that happens to be right above my servers. So what I am going to do is show, once I get it installed, that's why I haven't done the video because it doesn't exist yet, but I know I should do it. There's very little at my home rack, by the way. Most everything is here at my office, but that you should put, it's as simple as putting some plastic just to redirect water, because a lot of the leaks are small, but they can cause a little bit of water in a server, may as well be a lot of it of water server. It doesn't go good. It only takes a little to get in there. But you can just put some things, staple it to the rafters or anything if you have like an open basement, and away you go to kind of just redirect it somewhere else other than dripping on there. So it's one of those things that costs you very little from a build standpoint. You paid more for anything else in the rack just about than the $10 you spent to throw a little plastic up to redirect it. And it just has to be at a sloping angle because most things are small drips. I mean, other than major emergencies, but it'll probably save you quite a bit. It's the little things when you're building these.
The little things and the things you didn't expect would ever be a problem. Like one day I'll give you guys the story of my PS5 incident with the smart plugs to talk about a random thing that would happen. There's always some fun things to discover with Homelab that'll teach you about things you wouldn't normally even think about.
Yep. The a few other comments back to the kind of wrap up the topic of virtualization though. There is a really cool tool called Lab Gopher. If you want to use it, it's for hunting down deals on eBay. The other thing too, if mentioning TrueNAS, there's a lot of companies out there that kind of cater towards the free NAS, TrueNAS market, and if you type those in on eBay, you can find some pretty good deals on especially super micro systems that are already in the mode you want. Because one of the questions comes up like, oh, cool, I want to load ZFS with Proxmox on the system, but the Dell RAID controller won't let me do it because ZFS wants to talk natively to the hard drives. Yep. When you're buying a server like that, you want to make sure you have something. They may refer to it as IT mode or pass-through mode. There's going to be different nomenclature for this, but essentially you want raw access. If you type in FreeNAS on eBay, you'll actually find I'm trying to remember the name of the company. There's one of them that's really popular, but you'll find a lot of places that offer them already in that mode, because if not, you'll end up down the rabbit hole of the person who has the videos, how to re-flash firmware on some of these systems, which in itself is super tedious. Unix Surplus, that was the name of the company I was trying to think of. We've actually purchased things from Unix Surplus. I have no affiliation with them. I have no offer code or anything, but we have had good experience buying from Unix Surplus on eBay some server equipment we needed that was super micro.
And I've actually learned the hard way about the mode of the RAID card because I didn't think about it when I ordered a Dell server one time, and I ended up going on eBay, and sure enough, forgot the name of the individual, but literally all he does is just buy out these RAID cards for probably ridiculously cheap, and then just puts a small markup on them after he puts them in the correct mode for TrueNAS. And I bought a few of those, and it was perfect.
Yep. Yeah, someone said HBA. Yes, HBAs, which there's different ways you can hear it phrased. The most important part is you want the drives to have full control. And one thing nice in Unix Surplus lists this out in their listings on eBay. If you type in FreeNAS, you'll find some of their devices, and they'll tell you it's already in that mode, which is great because if that's your goal, is to have that. The other side that's important as well when you're looking at, and we'll use Dell as an example because I really like the Dell servers used, and because they're easy to find parts for. So one of the things about the Dell servers, one, they're usually on hardware compatibility lists, so they're easy to find support for, for XCP-ng and Proxmox as well. Two, they have better iDRAC systems in it, so you don't need a KVM. So as long as you get like the higher end iDRAC system, that allows you to do the lights out management. And thank you, Daniel Kirk says for maximum Homelab compatibility, we'll go with HP versus Dell versus Supermicro. Now, HP, I'll take a little contention with, and the reason why. They have some of the worst boot times ever when you're using HP. I've used them. They have ridiculously long times that they sit there booting. I don't know why. They seem to be less popular than the Dell models, but if you can't pass up. If you got a good deal, I'm not going to fault you on using one, because I was using one because we got a really good deal from a company that went out of business, and we used to have a couple of them a few years back. I loathe rebooting them remotely because I'm like, oh God, I know this is going to be a long time before this is back. It just sat for like 3 minutes on the boot screen every time. And the Dell takes a little while themselves. But if you look at ones, and this does include the Supermicro, as long as you get a newer one, you don't have to use a stupid Java interface. I think it's iDRAC 7 and beyond. Google this, because I didn't Google this before the show. They offer
Yeah.
a HTML5 KVM, and that makes your life so much easier of not having to sit in front of the server to get things done. This is a big advantage that server hardware has. Now, you can buy this and build it yourself, by the way. There's AS Rock, the company that makes motherboards, makes a line called AS Rack. And the AS Rack line has the newer ones, I should say, have the IP-based KVMs. So you can remotely control those with no monitor plugged into it. And that way you have the ability to get into the BIOS, do all the setup, and do everything. And it just works really well.
I like Supermicro and Dell a lot.
Yes.
I like one thing I do like about Supermicro more than Dell, because even if you did get the HTML5 version of the iDRAC, the remote console with your Dell, I just like the IPMI and Supermicro more. I
Yeah.
just think it's just more user friendly. That doesn't mean that iDRAC is hard by any case. It's really not. It's just I love the interface. I feel like it's more responsive and easier to get to things. But you're not going to be you're going to be served well with a Dell server. A pun not intended, but I guess it works. But the whole thing is like I just prefer Supermicro in that regard. But they're so close. I mean, I just have a soft spot for Dell, I think, because when I first started in the industry, that's what the company I worked at used. So I have this kind of like familiarity with those. But Supermicro to me seems to boot the fastest of the three that were asked. So I don't really care so much, though. If I have to wait 3 minutes, that's fine. I'll just play my Nintendo Switch while I'm waiting. It doesn't really matter to me so much. But if you're, have a line of people in your house at your office door because your Plex server is down, maybe you might care about speed at that point. But I think Dell and Supermicro are really, really good. I haven't really used HP to have an opinion, so I default to Tom's opinion on that.
Yeah, someone said I said it wrong, and they're probably right. It's AS Rock Rack. I thought it was called. I've seen people call it AS Rack, but I think it's the actual name of it's the AS Rock company, and they make a rack board that has it. So it's AS Rock Rack. That's
So many
still
people abbreviate things in IT that sometimes you just assume that it's abbreviated because everything else is, and it's just human nature just kind of draw the conclusion. So that's a pretty easy mistake to make, I think.
Someone said iDRAC needs a license. Now, unless Dell changed it, Dell's I mean, if you buy a Dell that has the Pro iDRAC that has that feature, to my understanding, the license is perpetual with it. It's part of the server. That I know of, it doesn't have renewals. I could be wrong if they changed it,
Yep.
but at least the servers we have perpetual licenses on them. But
Right.
I don't know if they have a newer version that doesn't have a perpetual license. But yes, something to look at is whether or not you get iDRAC or iDRAC Pro. It's only the iDRAC Pro, I believe, that still ships with the actual IPMI interface on there, or IPMI plus the HTML5 KVM, as long as you have the new version. Or is it called Dell Enterprise? Maybe it's not called Pro, it's called Enterprise. It's the higher end version of the iDRAC. But my understanding is it's a perpetual license.
Well, I think when in doubt, if you're getting it off of eBay, for example, which is a very common place to buy these, ask the person you're buying it from if the iDRAC is accessible and working.
Yeah.
Just having it isn't enough. Every time I've purchased a Dell server, I've never needed to buy a license. And that could be because either A, they're before they made a change, or B, they just had that purchased with the original order when the server was first produced. And I just took advantage of something that was already there. I'm not really sure. But that is a question you can ask. And I had one server that didn't have iDRAC at all. And I just purchased the iDRAC separately from an individual on eBay, and they must have done whatever it needs doing to make that work because it worked immediately when I installed it. So
yeah,
and
I see a couple of people mention it's called iDRAC Enterprise, and it's a lifetime option. That's my thought. Is it came with a perpetual license on there. Yeah, it's iDRAC Express or iDRAC Enterprise. Those are the two different variations. You want the Enterprise one, and frequently, from a price standpoint, when you're buying if you're buying a new server, that's a big price upgrade. From a used server, yeah, you can usually find it as not. You won't find a huge price difference on eBay between the two servers all the time, but you'll find a usage difference dramatically. So get the Enterprise one if you want those features.
Love to see Raspberry Pi replace iDRAC, as mentioned. That's happened, actually. I've
Yeah,
done
you
a
did that
review
video,
on it.
right?
Yeah, I did a video on this very recently. It's either I think it was last week actually. I forget because often I have videos recorded a few weeks ahead of time. It's called the Tiny Pilot KVM. And it was, disclaimer, it was sent to me for free by the manufacturer, the individual making them, because he wants the, exposure. But honestly, if I hated it, I would have just sent it back and I never would have did a video on it. I loved it. And in fact, my XCP-ng server is using it because that server is actually my old Thelio desktop, and I decided to use that as a test server. So what I did was, you have SSH access to the Tiny Pilot KVM. So I installed Wake on LAN on that, so I can have that Thelio desktop now server shut itself down. And whenever I want to spin it up to test XCP-ng, I just SSH into the Tiny Pilot. I issue the Wake on LAN command, and then I go to the web console for the Tiny Pilot, and I have the screen. I can use the keyboard on that, and that allows that desktop, which wouldn't normally have anything, IPMI or otherwise, to now have something that's every bit as good. The only feature it doesn't have is you can't attach like an ISO image to it like you can with iDRAC and IPMI, but the developer has told me that he is working on adding support for ISO images. He didn't give me a timeline or any kind of ETA, but he said that that's his current priority to get that working. So just keep in mind, if you purchase one, you will not have support for ISO image booting, but he's looking into making that a possibility. So if you're looking for that, you could buy one. I'm pretty sure it's open source. So if I'm not mistaken, you could just build your own if you just download the code and you have a Pi. So just
Yeah,
take a look at the Tiny Pilot KVM. It's pretty cool.
yeah, because they're selling it together as a product. I've looked at it because I think Craft Computing did a video on it as well. I looked at it, and they sell it as a kit for those of you that go, I just want it to work, and then they sell it as a bunch of pieces in a list with some software for those of us that want to tinker. So
And I am going to be buying another server pretty soon. I haven't decided if I'm going to build it or just purchase one outright. I'll probably use LabGopher, to be honest. And I'm going to buy another Tiny Pilot KVM for it because I want to support that. I think it's a great thing. And honestly, even if it comes with IPMI, I kind of like the Tiny Pilot. Maybe I'll just use it. Yeah, I lose the ISO booting, but it's cool to support that project. And yeah, I do like it. So I think I'm going to actually buy another Tiny Pilot. And that's the downside too, is that you have one Tiny Pilot per server, which means you have to buy one per server. He did mention, I forgot the guy's name, sorry, but he mentioned he wants to look into a way to where you could have one Tiny Pilot, and then you can have multiple attachments for all your servers, so you don't have to buy one per server. But right now it's a one-to-one kind of thing. So
well,
there's
two questions. Someone asked if it supports VGA or is it only HDMI?
It does if you have an HDMI to VGA dongle, like you would use with anything else. All you have to do is plug that into the HDMI port, and then you could use VGA. And that's
Okay.
the recommended approach if that's something you want to do.
Another option, Jay, this might be kind of a fun one, is you can buy on eBay some of these used KVMs, like the physical ones, physical KVMs that plug into a monitor and that. Plug that into all your servers and then control that with the Pi KVM. So now you can use one Pi KVM, and a lot of them have a keyboard shortcut that will switch between the servers. So you remote into the Pi KVM connects to a physical KVM that then allows you the multiple switching between all the other systems.
That's a really good idea, actually. I didn't think about that.
Those are cheap on eBay.
I have a box full of KVMs that I don't use because
there you go.
Well, the thing is, I have really bad experiences with them that I don't think will matter for this, because I notice with every single KVM I've ever purchased, I don't know why this is, it'll introduce flicker to my display on my desktop, and it just ends up being terrible. But I don't care about that on a server. A flicker once in a while is not going to bother me at all.
No.
So I'll just use one of those on there. That might just be the thing I needed. So thank you. You saved me. I mean, I might still buy another one to support the project, but I don't have to. That's probably a good idea.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Well, you have listened to an episode episode 1, because we did have episode 0, so this is 1. So depending if you count from 0 or not, I'll let you guys have the debate offline. This is going to be for those of you watching this on YouTube right now. We did buy a domain and we're setting this up to be a podcast. We'll let everyone know once it starts getting published. For now, it's just going to live here on YouTube. We do plan to continue to do this on YouTube, but then it'll also be for those of you that want to just listen to it. We're getting all the back end situated for podcasting. Podcasting's a little bit trickier on the back end. Me and Jay had a good conversation, but there's a lot more to do. It's not like YouTube where we just hit live and go.
But we're also trying to do it in a smart way. I've seen a lot of podcasts out there, and no shade, because it works for them, but they would spin up like a separate IRC server, and then they have to do multiple versions of it. And we're trying to get it down to, publish as few times as possible. Can't give any spoilers yet.
Oh, did we lose Jay?
On your local podcast catcher, whatever you use, you should be able to search for it once we have that done. So, we'll let you know.
Absolutely. So thanks everyone who came and joined us. And let me think. You can find me at lawrencesystems.com, and you can find him at
learnlinux.tv. Same domain as the channel, keeping it simple.
Yep, he keeps it simple. I do too.